Hello and welcome to Wednesday Debate Live with Taghreed Hussein here on Nile TV International. Tonight we'll be talking more about the important and pivotal moment in the Ukraine conflict, as this Friday, August the 15th, 2025, Alaska is becoming the epicenter of the historic one-to-one summit between the U.S. and the Russian leaders. This is definitely an unprecedented moment and meeting since the invasion of Ukraine. U.S. President Trump will be meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin to discuss the potential ceasefire in Ukraine. Europe is expressing deep concern over their exclusion, warning that a peace that is crafted without them is really risking being one peace at their expense on the other side. While Trump is not publicly confirming the details of the potential deal, however, Zelensky has outright rejected the notion that the country would allow Russia to take over any of its territory and spoken out against the idea of facilitating peace talks without the presence of Ukraine. So tonight we'll be discussing further the diplomatic efforts and the military shadows stretching across the Arctic horizon regarding this important topic, and we will be reading more about why Alaska meantime and what will be happening in the meeting, what will be the outcome of the Trump-Putin meeting regarding this important conflict. We'll be delving more also concerning the ceasefire, which is finally on the table in Ukraine, and the question still remains, at a time when global order is teetering on the fragile chord, this Alaskan summit will reshape the narrative of the East and West relations or not. That is going to be the question. But before delving into our topic, let's first read the top stories, the main headlines that make the stories of the day. At the cabinet meeting in the new administrative capital, Prime Minister Dr. Mustafa Madbouly had highlighted President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's recent talks with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni at Al-Ittihadiyya Palace. The discussions focused on deepening bilateral ties, strengthening Nile Basin cooperation, and addressing the pressing regional and international issues. Madbouly praised President el-Sisi's emphasis that relations among Nile Basin states must be grounded in mutual benefit, joint action, and the preservation and development of this vital resource, rejecting unilateral measures in the Eastern Nile and warning that Egypt will not overlook threats to its water security. The meeting also reviewed the outcome of Prime Minister Madbouly's visit to Jordan for the 33rd Egyptian-Jordanian Joint Higher Committee in Amman, with both sides identifying significant opportunities to expand cooperation and with directives given to translate signed agreements into actionable projects that strengthen ties and also serve both peoples. I'm highlighting more the developments vis-a-vis this important story, and more we have with us His Excellency Ambassador Youssef Zada, former assistant to the Foreign Minister, on the line. Your Excellency, good evening to you.
Good evening, Madam Tariq Hussein.
Thank you so much. Excellency, we're talking about Egypt's growing partnerships with different countries like Uganda and also with Jordan, and this, in fact, is signaling the role of Egypt as a model for regional stability and also for economic integration, Ambassador.
Yes, that's true. And I'm glad you highlighted the statements of His Excellency President el-Sisi yesterday at the press conference with the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, where he talked about the Egyptian state position regarding the issue of the Nile River waters, in the context of Museveni's official visit, of course. Now, we all know that the stance that the Egyptian stance is that water security is a red line, and in additional matter, particularly amid ongoing disputes over Ethiopia's Grand Dam called the GERD. The key points of the statements, I would like to summarize them as follows. Water security as an existential issue, and the red line, and the President emphasized that the Nile waters are a matter of life and death for Egypt. asserting that Egypt will not compromise or overlook any threat to its historical water rights. He stated that those who think Egypt will turn a blind eye to its water rights are mistaken. Now I'm quoting the President's words, adding that giving up Egypt's water shares equates to giving up our lives, he said. He firmly rejected unilateral actions in the Eastern Nile Basin, implicitly referring to the GERD, the dam, stating that any measures affecting Egypt's water share are unacceptable. And the President, of course, highlighted that Egypt and Sudan's water share are the total water volume in the White and Blue Nile basins amounts to approximately 1,600 billion cubic meters annually. However, Egypt and Sudan together receive only about 85 billion cubic meters. Now, we all know the treaty long ago between Egypt and Britain, 55.5 cubic and 18.5 billion for Sudan. However, equivalent to just 4% of the total, with the majority lost to forests, swamps, evaporation, and groundwater. I would like to say also the President noted that this share is the lifeline for over 105 million Egyptians and 10 million residents in Egypt. The support for development while projecting rights. He clarified that Egypt does not oppose development projects in the Nile Basin. We all know that Ethiopia declared that this dam is for the development issues when it comes to generating electricity for the country of Ethiopia. So the President highlighted that such electricity generation or agriculture provided do not affect Egypt's water share is a must. And he stated that only one issue is that such development should not impact the water share that we receive in Egypt and in Sudan. The President expressed support for regional cooperation and the efforts of the 7-member committee chaired by Uganda to reach a consensus among Nile Basin countries. Political pressures and the Egyptian public awareness are important and pivotal at this moment. The President says that Egypt is aware of any resist the tactics. Any pressure that's being applied on Egypt these days includes the Nile Basin and the dam project. He highlighted the awareness and resilience of the Egyptian people as a fundamental pillar in confronting potential threats. And I would say the President remarked that those who receive rainfall do not feel the suffering of those who do not. That's exact words of the President, noting that Egypt relies almost entirely on the Nile for over 98% of its water needs, with no viable alternative water sources. And of course, the Ugandan President's visit highlighted cooperation with the international stance, and the Sisi praised coordination with Uganda. The President highlighted the strong bilateral relations with the country and its leadership role in the Nile Basin Initiative. He noted that the international community, including statements from former President Trump, from the current President Trump, acknowledges Egypt's rights to the Nile waters. He affirmed Egypt's commitment to cooperative solutions and non-interference in other countries' conflicts. So, as we can see, the Nile issue, the waters, and the GERD is a strategic matter for Egypt, as the President highlighted yesterday.
Yes, definitely those important engagements, the recent diplomatic engagements, are enhancing Egypt's role as a regional leader in fostering sustainable resource management and cross-border economic growth, as His Excellency Ambassador Youssef Zada has emphasized. Thank you so much, Your Excellency Ambassador Youssef Zada, former assistant to the Foreign Minister, for your valuable input. And further reading more concerning our top story, our second top story for the day, Hamas expressed deep appreciation for Egypt's efforts in facilitating the entry of humanitarian aid into Gaza and alleviating civilian suffering. Egypt is reportedly intensifying diplomatic efforts with all parties to lay the groundwork for a lasting truce and eventual end to the war. Today, the Hamas delegation met with Egypt's intelligence chief to drive forward these mediation efforts, emphasizing the group's strong commitment to resuming ceasefire negotiations promptly. The delegation's presence in Cairo is marking a renewed push after months of stalled talks, signifying that Egypt remains a critical mediator. And through this renewed dialogue, Egypt is striving to channel negotiations towards humanitarian relief, a ceasefire, and ultimately peace in Gaza. And then more concerning the Alaska-Trump-Putin summit, which is considered to be our main topic for tonight, will be following this report, and we'll be back.
A high-stakes summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin will unfold on Friday in Alaska. This encounter, set against the backdrop of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, is being characterized by some as more of a listening exercise than a negotiation, yet it may be very well pivot the trajectory of the conflict. Alaska's symbolic and strategic significance is profound. Its geographical proximity to Russia, just 2 miles at the northwest point, makes it a broad staging ground for diplomacy, evoking both historical resonance and current geopolitical stakes. The summit's primary agenda centers on the war in Ukraine. Discussions may include proposals for ceasefire terms and potential territorial adjustments, suggestions that have been met with alarm by Kyiv and its allies. Kyiv's leadership has firmly rejected any deal that excludes Ukraine or compromises its sovereignty, stressing that no territorial concessions will be acceptable unless Ukraine is an integral part of the negotiations. Diplomacy is already extending beyond the summit. European and Ukrainian officials are coordinating ahead of the meeting, pushing for assurances that Ukraine's interests will not be sidelined and that any peace plan includes strict conditions and guarantees. The White House is reportedly deliberating the possibility of extending an invitation to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Adding to the tension, Russian forces have reportedly advanced in eastern Ukraine, potentially aiming to strengthen Moscow's negotiating position before the summit. Analysts caution that peace talks without Ukraine's direct participation are insufficient and that history shows so many ceasefire agreements falter or collapse when the primary victim of the conflict is marginalized. Alaska's local leadership is embracing the summit's arrival. The state's governor and senators have framed it as a strategic opportunity, likening it to past landmark visits and expressing cautious optimism that the talks could yield progress. Ultimately, while the structure and tone may be modest, framed as a listening session rather than a negotiating forum, the sit-down in Alaska could either facilitate a pathway toward de-escalation or entrench divisions further if perceived as undermining Ukraine's sovereignty. The world will be watching. On Friday, Alaska will host a one-on-one meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, an encounter that the world is treating as a potential pivot in Ukraine's war and broader U.S.-Russia relations. From Washington's side, the White House describes this session as a listening exercise, signaling no formal negotiation track yet, with an emphasis on hearing Moscow's position directly. This would be Putin's first visit to the U.S. soil since the full-scale military operation of Ukraine. The Alaska encounter is an attempt to reopen a frozen strategic dialogue and even reshape European security, reflecting how Arab coverage situates the summit within a large post-Cold War recalibration. Its reporting has also amplified Washington chatter that Kyiv's participation was not categorically ruled out, a point that, if realized, could dramatically alter the optics of the room.
And we're back, and always an honor to have with us Mr. Khaled Dawood, managing editor of Al-Ahram Weekly. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Mr.
Good to be
Dawood,
with
for
you.
being with us.
Thank you.
Well, sir, we're talking tonight more about this important meeting in Alaska. We have President Trump set to meet Russian President Putin in Alaska, and the question is, with the main headlines, smashing headlines, Why Alaska now, the significance of holding this important meeting in Alaska, and also why there and why now, the timing itself as well.
Well, I mean, why there is the closest point to Russia. I mean, again, it's like somewhere that's been a historic place for holding summits by the U.S. President Donald Trump. He also met there with the Chinese president during his first term. So obviously, it's like, you know, Trump known for breaking headlines and like making shows. He chooses certain places that are not usually common, like, you know, the Capitol, Washington, D.C., or some other major one of those, like, you know, retreats such as Camp David or the famous ones. So he's choosing Alaska, again, a relatively unknown location, but it's a reminder of similar international summits that were noted as relatively successful. But as a matter of fact, I mean, I'm sure you know, Khaled, that any event or activity that Trump takes part in, he claims it's a success, even if the whole world says it's a failure. So, and at the same time, Trump needs a diplomatic victory. I mean, as you remember very well, during his election campaign and even maybe in his inauguration speech, he said that he will solve the war between Russia and Ukraine between, like, in a matter of 24 hours.
Yeah.
And it's been more than 6 months right now since he became president. And it's not only that he did not achieve any success. On the contrary, he's been making more critical statements towards Russia. He's been threatening sanctions against Russia. And even ahead of this meeting, as you mentioned in this report, that the official line coming out from the White House and from Trump himself and from the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is that, like, this is a kind of an initial meeting in which they will try to outline the key steps needed to agree. But then there is this dramatic part, you know, always by Trump saying that he needs to look him in the eyes. And
that's why
he
called it a listening exercise.
A listening exercise that, you know, that's part of what they call the lowering expectations, is that they're trying to tell the outside public opinion this is not the summit that's going to result in announcing a ceasefire in the war between Russia or Ukraine and Ukraine, or some kind of breakthrough. So because probably, I mean, even Trump, with his exaggeration of his exceptional abilities, has become aware that Putin has different, Russian President Vladimir Putin has different calculations, has a different way of running things. Mr. Trump, the U.S. President, he always tends to forget the historic context of the conflicts that he's dealing with, whether in Ukraine or in the Middle East. He treats it like, you know, come on guys, let's do business, let's agree on things that will make us all do deals. You get some land from here, you get some land from there. I sign a contract with Ukraine to dig in for the rare minerals. So when he presents, or in Gaza, you know, he comes and says, let's turn it into the Riviera of the Middle East. It's a wonderful beachfront. It's a great property. He does not recognize the depth and complexity of the Middle East Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and he does not understand the complexity of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. And of course, he made even his job probably more difficult by proposing in advance something that the Ukrainian President Zelensky would not accept, which is the idea of swapping plan.
Yeah.
Of course, you know that Ukraine, from the Ukrainian standpoint, the Russians,
concessions concerning the territory.
Russians are the aggressors. They occupied parts of their territory, and from their perspective, they note something about their constitution, that it does not allow ceding any territory to another nearby country. So it's, and that's part of probably the reason why they're lowering expectations. As you can see, it's not only the Ukrainians that are left out of the arrangements between Russia and the United States, but also the Europeans. And as you know, the Europeans consider the Ukraine-Russia war a more imminent threat for them. So, I mean...
So we're not expecting tangible results, in your opinion, from this Alaska meeting?
Judging by the statements that are being made by the American side, at least by the American side, by the White House, they don't want to create the impression that this is the summit where some major announcement will come out. And Probably, I'm sure you've followed the argument that, you know, Trump should have had a meeting with Zelensky first, because over the past 3 years since the war started, the United States, the former Biden administration, has been the key provider of military assistance to Ukraine, the billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's a key talking point in Trump's argument that America is paying too much. Europe has to pay as well. We are going to pay, but what are you going to give us in return? You know, the classic Trump style. So now you're shifting, you're witnessing a major shift. And even within the U.S. media that I've been following, I mean, again, the Trump critics have been basically accusing the U.S. president of caving in to Putin's demands, and that Putin has practically been isolated by the United States and Europe since the war started. But here now he's having a summit with the President of the United States, the country that's been providing military support to Ukraine, and without the same firm stand and language that you used to hear from the former Biden administration.
Yes, observers are also following this sense of deadline that Trump had imposed on Putin in order to finalize this deal. So will we see any sort of financial practices?
Well, to be honest, I think like a few people expect that President Trump will carry out the threat to impose sanctions on Russia. Again, the entire attitude, his entire attitude towards the Ukrainian-Russian war is totally different. Under the Biden administration, all the blame was on Russia. And of course, everybody remembers this famous meeting between Trump and Zelensky at the White House, whereby they provided an unprecedented show of an open clash between the U.S. president and the world leader. And this was so influential, Taghreed, that right now many world leaders, before they go to the White House, they put into consideration, am I going to get a reception such as that of Zelensky? And we've seen it as well happening with the president of South Africa. And Trump is very outspoken with leaders he disagrees with. And when you see, for example, his clash with Brazil, or because of his support for the former President Bolsonaro, or his clash with Canada, you know, because Canada announced that they plan to recognize the Palestinian state, he goes immediately on imposing penalties, on like sanctions against the countries that oppose him. But in the case of Russia, there has been some, like, you know, bizarre stand by Trump in which he doesn't want to lose his relationship with the Russian President Putin. He likes him. He thinks he's a wonderful model of an authoritarian leader that can stay in office as long as he wants. So, I mean, and that's something that's, again, affecting the relationship between the United States and Europe, and of course the United States and Ukraine. I mean, we've seen the very tense relationship between the Ukrainian President Zelensky and the U.S. administration.
Yes, we'll be back to more concerning the EU relations, but since President Trump came in the second term of his presidency, he said that he's going to have a solution for the war in Ukraine in the first
and for the war in Gaza.
In the war in Gaza as well. However, he expressed disappointment at the lack of movement of Russia, and this has also been seen quite vivid. Are we before codifying any sort of understanding into what we call enforceable terms meantime?
Well, I mean, a lot of work has to be done in order to bring the Ukrainian side, particularly, into whatever plan that the U.S. President Trump is going to propose or discuss with Russian President Vladimir Putin. As I mentioned again, if the starting point is a ceasefire in which the Russians would be allowed to seize parts of the Ukrainian territories, I think that's going to cause problems. But at the same time, there are definitely some, leverage that the United States can practice in its relationship with Russia. And even though they're not going, Trump is not going into a direct confrontation with Russia so far, or with the Russian President Putin, but he's sending warning messages, and we see it through the tariffs that he's imposed on India, and the charge was that they are importing Russian oil. And both Russia and China, they are the major importers of the Russian oil. So there is an attempt to squeeze the Russian position and to get some concessions out of them, not in a direct manner, but through countries like India and China, but also Trump, in a change of policy, is also putting pressure on the Ukrainian side because they are providing a lot of weapons, intelligence information, and that probably might bring the Ukrainian side for some concessions, but accepting particularly giving in territories that were occupied by the Russians back from 2014 is going to be a very difficult task for sure.
Yes. What sort of steps do you see, Mr. Dawood, following this summit from the different parties? What sort of consequences are we expecting from the parties following the outcome of the Alaska meeting?
Well, probably the maximum ambition, and that would be a major breakthrough, is to reach some sort of a ceasefire. I mean, again, at the end of the day, this war broke out in February 2022. I mean, it's been more than 3 years. Right now, it's a very costly war. That's like would be the best you can expect out of this summit, I think. But I mean, again, there is always the alternative, because Trump would never like to consider any meeting on that level to be a failure. There are always this resort to some humanitarian measures, temporary ceasefire, I mean, like swap of prisoners, things like this that at least might be like a sweetener for further negotiations. But I think there is a big gap in the positions between Ukraine and Russia, and there is a lot of mistrust between the two sides. And even up until like yesterday, I mean, the Russian official position is not only asking for control of territories they occupied, but they continue to ask for the removal of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, which is, I mean, again, a very difficult step that one could imagine, that from the Russian perspective and point of view, that there will not be a true peace with Ukraine, except if there is a change in government and the change of presidency, basically. And I mean, so that's part of the complexity, and that's why I'm saying if they manage to announce a ceasefire for even a short period of time, to give the chance for the first time in more than 3 years to discuss a real peace plan, that would be a major achievement. But otherwise, the bad side, or the kind of would be seen as a departure from effort for diplomacy if, as Trump himself announced, he said, I'm not going to be involved in this conflict anymore, or if we see a direction towards imposing direct sanctions by the United States against Russia.
Yes. Concerning the stance of the EU foreign ministers, they convened urgent virtual talks ahead of the Alaska summit, and they emphasized that any sort of a resolution to the Ukraine conflict must include Ukraine and the EU, hence rejecting any sort of a deal that would exclude Kiev. The reading, of course, to this sense of exclusion, and what if, and what would be the outcome.
You know, since President Trump took office, as you know, the relationship with Europe has been largely tense. I mean, the least to say. And even though there are a few, like European key leaders, particularly, namely, the French President Macron and the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, as well as the new German Chancellor Merz, they have a direct communication channel with the U.S. President. But at the same time, as you can see, the differences are not only over Ukraine. The differences are over tariffs as one major issue in the huge economic relations between the two sides. The tension is, of course, over the war in Ukraine. The tension is over the war in Gaza. And you have seen how the U.S. President Donald Trump and his Secretary of State Marco Rubio have been very critical of the French president, have been like trying to demean their positions, saying that it doesn't make any difference. And probably, I mean, some analysts would say that you know, the British-French position, the changing one towards Palestine and the thinking to recognize Palestine is partly a reflection of the growing gap in political stance between the United States and Europe. So again, as I said in the beginning, the European Union is feeling sidelined in these talks that are being led by Putin. The French President Macron was among the top European leaders who tried to maintain a dialogue with Putin, but again now he's very critical of the Russian president. The same was the case with Germany, but the meeting that Trump is holding with Putin definitely goes contrary to the wishes of the European Union and the European leaders, particularly Britain and France, who wished that the American president would continue the policy, the hardline policy of the former Biden administration.
What if unwelcomed agreements were there out of this important summit meeting in Alaska? What could be the repercussions vis-a-vis the EU and its allies?
Well, if it's unwelcomed by the Ukrainians, it will be very difficult to carry out on the ground. And at the same time, it will increase the tension between the United States and Ukraine, and probably we will see an increase in terms of military support by the Europeans. And that's part of the argument that Trump has been making all the time since he became president and even during his election campaign. He sees the war between Russia and Ukraine as a European problem. He doesn't see it as an American problem. And that's why he's saying, okay, we are going to help and support in backing up Ukraine, but also Europe has to pay a larger share. We have seen this in pushing the Europeans and as NATO members to increase their military expenditure from 2% of their GDP to 5% of the GDP. And every time Trump gets into office, the Europeans actually increases their expenditure on military equipment, and again you hear more of like kind of proposals by the French that we need to have an independent European force aside from NATO, that we have to decrease our dependence on the United States and in terms of military protection. So these are only going to be part of the repercussions that we can see, even though at the end of the day, I guess, you know, the Europeans will always be hoping that these are like 3 or 3.5 more exceptional years in US politics. But who knows? I mean, again, Trump is not going to be in office forever. I mean, he's not Russian President Vladimir Putin, but like, you know, at the end of the day, the Europeans might try to resist at least some major radical changes that even President Trump will not be able to carry out within the coming 3 years. If there is talk about swapping territory, allowing Russia to control certain parts, Ukraine to give up important parts for them in terms of their territory, I think that's something that's going to take definitely more than 3 years, considering that the war has been already going on for 3 years.
Yes. Mr. Dawood, talking about the steps undertaken, in your opinion, to include Ukraine meaningfully in the peace process. What could be the steps? What could be the criteria throughout the peace process?
Well, I mean, again, I've just been following before coming here how the Europeans were hosting Zelensky in a meeting to discuss their future strategy. I think there was even a conference call between the European leaders and US President Donald Trump before his meeting with Putin on Friday. So probably they're trying their best to set some parameters for these upcoming discussions that are coming up between the US President and Putin. And I think also, I mean, besides the US position, we have to wait and see what are the Russians going to come up with. I mean, this is also a very important part of the equation. What's the Russian plan and what are the Russian proposals that are going to be presented during this summit? If the Russian side goes to Alaska and after the summit continues to raise the same demands about control of the territories they managed to occupy after the war started, about the need to change the Ukrainian government and all the same kind of rhetoric, that's definitely going to bring us back to square one and perhaps push President Trump. And that's probably like a kind of an American kind of an attitude, is that you know, they try, or at least someone like businessman Trump, who's busy with many things, he'll try to work on it for 6 months, for 9 months. It doesn't work. Okay, let's move on. This is a European problem, and the Europeans have to deal with it.
Yes. Well, talking about Mr. Dawood influencing this sense of balance between peace prospects and at the same time the Ukrainian territorial integrity. And it's an area which is very sensitive here.
Of course. Because of the history, and that's what I was trying to note, that someone like Trump perhaps doesn't consider or, you know, appreciate the historic context of the way someone like President Putin looks at Ukraine. I mean, again, many Ukrainians would tell you openly that Putin, someone like Putin, who's a child of the former Soviet Union, has never actually recognized the independence of Ukraine. And he continues to see it as part, not necessarily of course, the now non-existent former Soviet Union, but part of the Russian Empire. You know, and that's, again, the reason why you see that despite any differences within the European Union, the countries that have had a history of being controlled by the former Soviet Union are at the forefront of those who are calling for stronger support for Ukraine, because they are always afraid that they're going to be next. At the end of the day, after Ukraine, Poland is very worried, Hungary is very worried. I mean, most of these so-called former Eastern European nations that were under the former Soviet Union influence
are very worried,
that if the Russian plan gets through into Ukraine, that again there will be more expansionist attitudes by the Russian government. And that's, again, part of the reason why people are skeptical and questioning the chances for the success of the Trump-Putin summit to solve the problems, because the action that President Putin took back in 2022 was pretty daring, you know, in terms of carrying out such a major offensive, calling it in the beginning a limited military operation, because there is no limited military operation that lasts for 3.5 years. I mean, and no limited military operation that leaves behind such a very heavy cost in terms of human death toll and economic loss. And so it's a situation that probably the difference is that we have an American president once every 4 years, but the Russian president is more strategic and long-term thinking compared to someone like Trump, who is seeking an immediate big headline victory that might not necessarily last, but at least give me something to claim. I'm the best world leader, that I deserve the Nobel Peace Prize. You know, you can see that he's been doing a lot of these peace deals, Congo and, you know, Rwanda, and then you see in between Azerbaijan and Armenia, like conflicts. But then what about Palestine and Gaza? I mean, it's a different story. I mean, but like, what about Russia? I mean, even if he manages to reach a ceasefire, he's going to say, well, this qualifies me for the Nobel Peace Prize, let alone that he's been nominated by a suspected war criminal, which is the Israeli Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Dawood, we're also before a scene where we find that instead of imposing sanctions on Russia, as President Trump had threatened before, we find him alleviating one. So it didn't happen on the solid grounds. How symbolic is that? And will Moscow consider this as some sort of a triumph?
Well, you see, I mean, again, Americans, hardliners who are still like kind of belonging to the era of the Cold War, and who see Russia as the biggest threat to the U.S. security, they are not happy with the way the U.S. president is dealing with Putin, and even giving him concessions that are not given to other countries, even known as being close to the United States. Canada, biggest case, of course, which is, you know, I mean, very, very close to the United States, but he's coming in with those, you know, kind of shocking statements about Canada becoming the 51st American state, and, you know, imposing those heavy taxes on them, while at the same time, the country that's been a historic rival of the United States for many years, he's treating Putin nicely, actually borrowing some of his proposals. And as you've mentioned, about the exceptional treatment in terms of tariffs. I mean, he's been imposing tariffs on all world countries, but despite all the suspicion within the United States and about his, the relationship and the role of Russia, we can see that Putin, that U.S. President Donald Trump still hopes that by building a kind of a personal trust relationship with Putin, he can get something out of him, which is, again, he didn't manage to do during his first term between 2017 and 2021. And amid all the complications and the stand of Ukraine and the stands of the European Union, I think many people would not be wrong to doubt that he will manage to reach something tangible in terms of ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
Yes. From your reading and analysis, Mr. Dawood, do you see any areas where both sides are willing to have a compromise?
You see, again, the problem, the compromises are needed between Russians and Ukrainians. Mm-hmm. On one hand, Trump is saying this is a European problem, this is a Ukrainian problem, and at the same time, that's why people have been critical of excluding the Ukrainian side before the summit, because this is not, as Trump said, this is not an American problem. So why shoulder alone the responsibility of putting proposals? If you're speaking on behalf of Ukraine, if you're seeing the condemnation of the Russian action, so you should definitely coordinate with the Ukrainian side first, which has not been the case. And we've even seen, as part of the strange relationship, let's put it this way, between the Trump administration and Russia, that it was like for the first time the United States vetoed a resolution that had a condemnation for the Russian invasion of Ukraine just a month after Trump getting into office, and blocking this resolution from proceeding. So Trump has been very critical even of President Zelensky because of the strong language expected, from him towards Russia, saying that his language doesn't help in reaching a peaceful settlement with Moscow. But at the same time, I don't think that President Putin and the Russian military have been giving Trump a chance to claim that his charm attack with the Russian President Vladimir Putin has been producing results. Russians continue to bomb relentlessly the capital Kiev and other major Ukrainian facilities, and actually there are more advancements on the ground by the Russian side that even forced President Trump to be more critical of the Russian side. So that's why I'm telling you, the Russians, President Putin in particular, is definitely playing on the time factor. Maybe he will try to give some carrot to the U.S. president to claim that he has achieved something, but again, there are many doubts and difficulties awaiting this upcoming summit.
I thank you so much, Mr. Khaled Dawood, our renowned journalist, managing editor of Al-Ahram Weekly, for being with us tonight on Wednesday Debate Live.
Thank you, Tagreed. Pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. Pleasure is mine, sir. Well, thank you, dear viewers, for joining us. That was Wednesday Debate, and we have tackled the forthcoming Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska, this important diplomatic moment, which is right now under global scrutiny. Stay tuned to Nile TV International for more coming up. I'm Dawood Hussein. Many thanks for watching.